November 1993, Los Angeles. A private gathering at Laurel Canyon, in the hillside home of a prominent music journalist. The room was filled with the kind of people who shaped American music: songwriters, producers, critics, and a few carefully selected artists. Outside, the city sprawled beneath them, but inside, conversation flowed around, intimate tables lit by warm lamplight. Joni Mitchell sat in the corner, a glass of wine in her hand, surrounded by admirers. At 50, she was a living legend of songwriting, the poet laureate of folk rock. Her catalog read like a masterclass in emotional honesty. Blue, Both Sides Now, A Case of You. Songs that had soundtracked decades of heartbreak, love, and self-discovery. She wore her experience like earned wisdom. Across the room, Kurt Cobain sat quietly on a leather couch, looking uncomfortable in the sophisticated gathering. At 26, he was the reluctant spokesman for Generation X, the man whose raw honesty had accidentally made him famous. But here, among these established artists, he seemed small, uncertain, out of place in his thrift store flannel. The conversation tonight centered on authenticity in music, a subject that always generated heated debate in these circles. What made a song real? What gave an artist the right to sing about certain experiences? How do you separate genuine emotion from manufactured angst? The debate had been flowing for hours, fueled by good wine and passionate opinions from people who'd spent their careers crafting emotional narratives. Someone mentioned the recent surge in confessional songwriting, how young artists were mining their pain for commercial success, turning personal trauma into MTV-friendly anthems. The comment hung in the air, loaded with judgment and generational suspicion. Joni's voice cut through the murmur of conversations, sharp and decisive. "Experience matters," she said, her tone carrying decades of authority earned through heartbreak, creativity, and survival. You can't write about love until you've been broken by it. You can't sing about loss until you've actually lost something that mattered. Real songwriting requires real living. A few people nodded approvingly. This was conventional wisdom in songwriting circles, accepted truth among the established guard. Authenticity required lived experience. Pain had to be earned through time and mistakes. Take these young musicians, Joni continued, her eyes drifting toward Kurt, though she didn't name him directly. The room understood the subtext. They sing about heartbreak like they invented it. But what do they know about real love? About marriages that fail after 20 years? About dreams that die slowly over decades? About watching yourself change in ways you never expected? About losing friends to time, not just death? She paused, letting the words settle, her voice gaining strength from conviction. "When I wrote Both Sides Now, I was 23, or Joni said. I thought I understood what I was singing about. I thought I was so wise, so perceptive. But I didn't know anything, not really. It took 20 years of actual living, divorces, disappointments, health scares, career struggles, before I understood what those lyrics actually meant. Experience is everything in this business. Without it, you're just playing dress-up with other people's emotions." Kurt shifted in his seat but said nothing, his face remaining neutral. But those who knew him recognized the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed silently against his leg. Signs of internal processing, of someone absorbing words that cut deep. A journalist across the room asked Joni to elaborate, sensing a moment worth capturing. She was warming to the subject now, speaking with the confidence of someone who'd survived decades in the music business, who'd earned the right to judge. "Love songs especially," she said, gesturing with her wine glass. "Young people think they know what love is. They write these passionate songs about forever and always, about souls connecting and hearts merging. But real love, the kind worth writing about, that comes from compromise, from disappointment, from learning to love someone despite their flaws, not because of their perfection." She paused, sipping her wine, letting the words settle into the room's consciousness. You can't sing about the complexity of human relationships when you've only experienced the simple parts. The butterflies and the passion and the promises are easy. Anyone can write about that. It's the aftermath that teaches you what love actually is. It's staying when you want to leave. It's forgiving when you want to punish. It's finding beauty in ordinary Tuesday mornings after the romance has faded. Kurt stood up slowly, his movement deliberate but not aggressive. He walked to where an acoustic guitar leaned against the wall, a vintage Martin that belonged to their host. He picked it up with familiar reverence, tested the tuning, made small adjustments with the precision of someone who'd spent years coaxing music from wounded instruments. "Mind if I play something?" he asked quietly. Joni gestured graciously. "Please, let's hear what the new generation has to say." Kurt sat down on a stool, cradled the guitar, positioned his fingers on the fretboard. The room fell silent, everyone sensing something significant was about to happen. He began to play the opening chords of Both Sides Now, not the bright, optimistic version from Joni's early career, not the jazz-influenced interpretation from her later albums. This was something entirely different. Kurt's arrangement was sparse, haunting, built around minor chord variations that transformed the familiar melody into something darker. His voice when he began to sing was barely above a whisper. Rows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air. But the way he sang those words, they carried different weight. In Kurt's voice, the angel hair sounded fragile, temporary. The ice cream castles seemed to melt as he sang about them. He wasn't singing about youthful romance. He was singing about the death of innocence. As he continued through the first verse, Kurt's interpretation stripped away the song's nostalgic sweetness, revealing something more painful underneath. He sang like someone who'd watched his own dreams dissolve, who understood that growing up meant losing things you couldn't get back. When he reached the chorus, "I've looked at clouds from both sides now," his voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion. He sang those familiar words like they were a confession, an admission of confusion and loss. Joni sat perfectly still, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. This was her song, her composition, but Kurt wasn't covering it. He was excavating it, finding pain in places she'd forgotten existed. For the second verse, Kurt made subtle changes to the lyrics. Instead of moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, he sang moons and pills and hospital bills. The alteration was minimal but devastating, updating the imagery for his generation's reality. His guitar work grew more complex as the song progressed. He found spaces between the chords where he could insert small melodic phrases, creating a conversation between his voice and the instrument. It was clear he'd thought deeply about this arrangement, had found his own way into the song's emotional landscape. The bridge hit differently in Kurt's version. When he sang, "But now they only block the sun," the words carried the weight of clinical depression, of fame that felt like prison, of love that had curdled into something toxic. The room was mesmerized. These were music industry professionals who'd heard thousands of cover versions. But this felt different. Kurt wasn't just reinterpreting the song, he was revealing its hidden architecture. When he finished, Kurt set the guitar down and looked at Joni. "Thank you for writing that," he said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. They'd witnessed something rare, a young artist showing a master that her own creation contained depths she'd never fully explored. Joni's eyes were wet. She wiped them quickly, trying to maintain her composure, but the emotion was unmistakable. "How?" she started, then stopped. "Where did you find that in there?" Kurt shrugged. "It was always there. You wrote it. I just heard it differently." Joni stood up, walked over to where he sat. The room watched as the folk legend approached the grunge icon. "That wasn't the song I wrote," she said quietly. "Wasn't it?" Kurt replied. They talked for the next hour, not about the music industry or career strategies, but about songwriting itself, about how songs evolve beyond their creators' intentions, how they meant different things to different people, how a single lyric could carry multiple truths simultaneously, revealing new meanings across decades and experiences. "When I wrote those words 30 years ago, I thought I was writing about romantic disillusionment," Joni admitted, her voice softer now, more vulnerable. "Boy meets girl, girl loses boy, girl gains wisdom. Simple narrative arc. But in your version, it sounded like something deeper, like existential crisis, like the loss of faith itself." Kurt nodded slowly, considering his words. "Maybe both. Maybe that's what makes it a good song. It's big enough to hold different kinds of pain." Joni leaned forward, genuinely curious now. But how did you find that in there? Those weren't my original intentions. I don't know if intentions matter once a song exists, Kurt replied. Maybe what you intended is just one possible meaning. Maybe songs know more than their writers do when they're written. The conversation revealed something unexpected to the room's observers. This young musician Joni had dismissed as inexperienced was actually deeply thoughtful about songcraft, articulate about the mysterious process of creation. He talked about melody construction, about how emotion moved through chord progressions, about the delicate relationship between words and music, about finding honesty in unexpected places. I've been hurt, Kurt said at one point, his voice quiet but steady. Maybe not the same ways you have. Different details, different causes. But hurt is hurt. Loss is loss. Loneliness is loneliness. The specifics change from person to person, generation to generation. But the feeling underneath, that's universal. That's what connects us. Joni studied his face, seeing something she'd missed earlier in the evening. You've thought about this a lot. Music is all I have, Kurt replied simply. If I can't be honest about what I feel, what's the point? As the evening wound down, guests beginning to gather coats and say goodbyes, Joni made an unusual admission. I was wrong earlier, she said, her voice carrying the weight of genuine reconsideration. About experience being everything. You showed me tonight that interpretation matters as much as experience. Maybe more. Kurt looked surprised, unused to such direct praise from established artists. You weren't wrong about experience. Experience does matter, but so does empathy. So does imagination. So does being honest about what you feel, even if you can't explain exactly why you feel it. Different kinds of knowledge, Joni mused. Different ways of being alive, Kurt agreed. The exchange became legendary in songwriting circles, retold and embellished over the years, but always centered on the same core truth. Great art transcends the biographical circumstances of its creation. In interviews years later, Joni would reflect on that night with unusual humility. I thought I owned that song, she told Rolling Stone in 1995. I thought because I'd written it, lived through everything it described, I understood it completely. Kurt showed me that songs don't belong to their writers once they're released. They belong to whoever needs them. When asked if Kurt's interpretation changed how she performed the song, Joni nodded. Absolutely. I couldn't go back to the innocent version after hearing his. He'd shown me that both sides now could be about different kinds of loss, different kinds of wisdom. He'd expanded the song's emotional territory. The collaboration Joni suggested that night never happened. Kurt died 5 months later, leaving behind questions about what might have been. But the evening at Laurel Canyon became legendary among songwriters, proof that great art transcends the age or experience of its interpreter. People who were there still talk about Kurt's performance, how it was simultaneously respectful and revolutionary, how it proved that the best interpretations aren't imitations but revelations, showing familiar songs in new light. Joni Mitchell had dismissed Kurt Cobain, suggesting he was too young to understand real love, real loss. Kurt's response wasn't an argument or a defense. It was 4 minutes with an acoustic guitar, showing the legend that her own song contained universes she'd never fully explored. The encounter changed both artists. Joni began approaching her classic songs with fresh curiosity, wondering what other meanings they might contain. Kurt, for his part, gained confidence that his emotional instincts were valid, that youth didn't disqualify him from understanding complex emotions. That night proved something important about art and wisdom. Experience matters, but so does empathy. Age brings knowledge, but youth brings different kinds of insight. Fresh perspectives, unfiltered emotion, the courage to feel deeply without the protective cynicism that often comes with time. The best songs aren't owned by their creators. They're shared with anyone brave enough to find their own truth within them, to risk vulnerability in the act of interpretation. Kurt Cobain didn't try to compete with Joni Mitchell's experience that night. Instead, he showed that experience takes many forms, that different kinds of pain produce different kinds of wisdom, that 26 years of intense living can teach lessons that 50 years of careful living might miss. And Joni, to her lasting credit, was wise enough to listen, humble enough to learn from a voice she'd initially dismissed.